There exist 5 universes, each one tentatively connected to the others. Each universe is defined by the absence of one of the 5 elements: earth, water, air, fire, and magic. Our universe is the one without magic. The first to come were the ones that wanted our fire. They came from a sinkhole in the ocean that our scientists determined to be a mechanism much like a wormhole. Then came the ones that wanted our Earth. They crashed into our planet on 1,000 meteorite-like vehicles made of a substance unknown to our universe. And at last, the ones who wanted our air and the ones who wanted our water. They came together from portals that eviscerated our poles, one for the South Pole, the other for the North. Each had accomplished feats that had left our scientists baffled. And what was even more troubling, they all resembled humans. We had tried greeting the ones who wanted our fire. We had sent them presents, precious metals, and the welcoming smile of our most expert convoys. They retaliated with a tsunami that wiped out Japan. It was magic, real magic, something we had previously thought only existed in Hollywood and cartoons. With a few incantations, they could manipulate the water, the earth, even the air that we breathed. But they could not touch fire. So we gave them what they wanted: napalm, incendiary bombs, hellfire missiles. They wanted our fire so bad, I hoped they like our gifts. Things were desperate, but humanity was always at its best when pushed to the edge. Then came the Earth-takers. At first we had thought they were here to aid us in the invasion. They seemed enemies to the fire-takers, and as the old saying goes, the enemy of my enemy. But though they were quick to attack each other, they were even quicker to attack us. These new aliens, they wanted our Earth. So we gave it to those bastards with steel-tipped bullets, titanium-plated tanks, and a kinetic bombardment of tungsten launched from our satellites. By the times the portals opened in the North and South Poles, we already knew what to do. These aliens looked like us, but that was where the similarities ended. Everything they had ever wanted they had accomplished through magic. What would have taken humans years to do, they could simply chant an incantation to do so. Thank God we never fell into the folly of magic. They have no idea what it means to move mountains by hand, to conquer the skies armed only with dirt and stone, to create the greatest weapons in our known universe because we were pushed that far into the corner. Aliens this week would never snuff out humanity. That, I promise you. Michelle's pen stopped at the period. The walls around her shook. Bits of dirt crumbled from the ceiling onto her desk. The lights swayed, dancing the shadows around her. She had spent all night on this letter. It was the last one she would ever write and the first aimed at humanity's next generation, the generation of soldiers who had never experienced an alien-free Earth. "Michelle," came a voice from behind. She turned to see her first general, Paxson, his feet together, shoulders stiff, and arms held to his head in salute. They had started the resistance together when the governments crumbled and countries fell. At first, it had simply been a way to quell their anger as the other aliens fought for lands rightfully theirs. Blow a hole in a supply chain, sabotage key communications, small-scale things. But just as the aliens had done, she had underestimated humanity's grit. 1,000,000 calls, emails, texts flooded her servers, and as she strung them all together, the resistance was born. "At ease, General," she said. Paxson lowered his arm. "Commander Gladstead, the Earth-takers are approaching from the north in war balloons. Initial scouts report a tornado of fire dragged behind them." Michelle smiled at her friend. "At ease," she said. "Commander Gladstead, you sound like a grunt." She had always hated that title, Commander. In a previous life, she was a preschool teacher, and now men of the highest positions of power all reported to her. Her friend's shoulder dropped. "As you command, Michelle." "But this," he said with a crescent grin. He knew how power annoyed her. She ignored his smile. "How are we holding up against the fire-takers?" "Still at a stalemate, but not for long. We're almost out of missiles, and our soldiers on the ground are being swallowed by the Earth itself." Michelle nodded. "Not good news, but good enough." "And at our east and west?" "The others are approaching. Their scouts are already here with their armies soon to follow." She chuckled. Victory was always so bittersweet. Paxson, she said, get out of here. Tell everyone not in combat to do the same. He didn't move. He pressed his lips together and stared at Michelle, humanity's commander, the last bastion of their old world, his friend. Come with me, he said, pleaded. We don't fool magic, Michelle said, a grin parting between her lips. They all came knowing full well that this is a trap, and that's because the bait is just too good to pass off. Look at that. Michelle from Podunk, Oshkosh, Wisconsin, the greatest military asset in the world. Not bad, eh? Paxson coughed out a chuckle. He took a small breath and gritted his teeth. Commander, it's been an honor. Don't worry, General. I'll show them just how high the price is for the resistance, Commander. Yes, ma'am. The general straightened up, every one of his muscles stiff. He jabbed his forehead with his hand and returned Michelle the sharpest salute she had ever seen. Without another word, he left. Give him hell, General, Michelle whispered to the back of his head. She watched even as he turned the corner and disappeared into the underground corridors of their bunker. Drops of water followed him out. The ground shook again. Another aftershock, another earthquake. Michelle stared at her letter. She nodded and put pen to paper. We are about to unleash the deadliest weapon humanity has ever conceived. We call it the hydrogen bomb. It is the combination of every single one of our elemental powers. The blast will consume their armies and leave their bases defenseless, and when that happens, I have a single selfish request. Take everything from them. Go through their portals, their sinkholes, their spaceships, and show them the true horrors of the war they have bestowed upon us. Long live humanity, the warriors without magic. Michelle Gladstead, Commander of the Resistance. The hull of the plane shook, squeaking as metal scraped against metal. All around him he saw reflections of his own face, grim, downcast eyes, pale. He gripped his knee and checked his watch. 11 hours, 59 minutes, and 30 seconds. Electricity coursed to the tip of his fingers. 30 more seconds. Michelle had named their counterattack the Humanity Offensive, an apt name. If it failed, it would be humanity's last. If it succeeded, it would go down in history as the greatest military maneuver in the known universe. 11 hours, 59 minutes, and 45 seconds. Make sure you're buckled in, Commander, a soldier said beside him. He flinched at that word. Commander. Not yet, he thought, but he checked his seatbelt again anyways. It was simply rope tied to a metal buckle. The VIP plane had the real deal, elastic, polyester, even cushioned seats. But he was a soldier first, a politician second. His place was with the grunts at the forefront of the Humanity Offensive. 12 o'clock. He stared out the UV-blocking windows, his breath held, waiting for the dark clouds to evaporate by the force of humanity's greatest weapon, for the blast like the earth itself cracking, literally, a shot heard round the world. But all that sounded was the ticking of his own watch. He squinted his eyes. Night changed to day. The storm clouds evaporated, and for a brief second he could see the old Resistance HQ, every muddy trench, every crumbling building, even the trees. Then came the sound like the crack of God's whip. The sky split in two, and his plane shook like Earth's greatest earthquake, its metal screeching. The grunts inside held each other to their seats. Some screamed, but it was drowned out by the rumbling a million thunderclaps. Paxson never looked away. He stared through the window at Michelle's final gift to humanity. Tears filled his eyes, flung off his face by the shaking of the plane, and still he never once looked away. He wanted the image seared into his corneas. The sound echoed through the sky. He knew it would reach across the oceans. The fire would be a beacon seen by every resistance army in the world. It was their signal. The time had come to, in the words of a dear friend, give 'em hell. Paxson was given charge of the aerial unit, the one tasked with invading the fire-takers. In the confusion of the hydrogen bomb, they had flown over the Pacific Ocean sinkhole undetected. The parachuting light blinked on, casting a red glow to every soldier in the plane. They fiddled with their weapons, their breaths stuttered and eyes wide. What would Michelle do? But Paxson already knew. She would give humanity whatever it needed. Need weapons? Here's my guns. Need courage? Here's my words. Need a cause? Here's the resistance. Commander Paxson grabbed his radio receiver. Soldiers! He screamed, startling every grunt in the plane. We are about to embark on the most glorious, the most swift, the deadliest, darkest, most dominating conquest in the history of mankind. Cower because humans are frail? Cry because we have no magic? We will win because we are weak. In our humiliating weakness, we have created the tools and weapons that no invader ever thought possible. They, who were born gods, have no need for such power. But not us. We are humans. We are impossibly frail and weak, and it is this very weakness that have bestowed upon us the tools to conquer their miracles. We will teach them to fear weakness itself. The light in the plane flickered green. The time had come. Go! The commander ordered as the back hatch of 10,000 warplanes opened up. Go to conquer our invaders, avenge our fallen. Humanity does not die today. The soldiers gripped their weapons tight, their lips pressed together. Nobody shook. Nobody cried. Yes, sir! They screamed and leapt out the plane. Paxson watched them go. He watched as an entire army, as vengeance incarnate, fell from the skies. He clutched his rifle and stepped into the cool night air. Fire-takers, the first to invade, would be the first to fall. And so began the humanity offensive. The water roared, gushing down into a blackness Paxson could not peer through. The wind blew his eyes shut. He muttered a silent prayer in the dark. The sound of water cut and something crinkled. He opened his eyes just in time to see an icy wall in front of him. He shielded his face as he crashed through its thin layer. They had arrived. Water poured out of a hole in the pale yellow sky, freezing as soon as it came into this world. It dispersed in a collection of frozen droplets, forming the layer of ice the soldiers were smashing through. Dangling in the heavens were 3 black rocks, like the core of a planet or a star. The air nipped at Paxson's cheeks. Shit. In their desperation, they didn't have the time to properly probe the other worlds. Initial readings showed that it was habitable. After all, the alien's physiology was mostly a perfect copy of a human's. However, a world without fire was a world without heat, and they hadn't brought the gear to last in such a world. Except, there was heat. The further he fell, the warmer it became. Something was warming the planet without fire. He plummeted toward a gray landscape filled with what looked like fur. It was everywhere. The trees under them had their leaves caked with it. Even the distant mountains were spotted with patches of it. Perhaps this was their version of grass. The tanks and rovers fell to the ground, navigating through the forest for some flat ground to land on. As they landed, the fur parted for them. Paxson stared, wide-eyed. Whatever this fur was, it was alive. And as the vehicles moved, the fur grew back to reclaim lost territory. The radio cackled alive. I think I found their heat source, a soldier said. It's this grass. Paxton nodded against the wind. There was probably some mechanism, some magic that made this possible, but he dismissed it. Maybe one day he would learn all there was to learn about this world, but first, he would conquer it. Parachutes, Paxson said into his radio and yanked his own open. All around him, 50,000 parachutes opened up. Suddenly, all the fur in the forest receded away, revealing deep trenches full of fire-takers. A waft of icy air blasted the soldiers. It's an ambush, Paxson screamed as a barrage of rocks flew their way. As it turned out, they wouldn't just be fighting against the inhabitants of this new planet. They would be fighting the planet itself. Lieutenant Sam Mitchell came from a long generation of drivers. His grandfather had been a taxicab driver, his father an Uber driver, and he drove an M1 Abrams battle tank. "They're mowing us down," came Paxson's voice. "Clear those trenches or we're screwed. Air support ETA 5 minutes. Sam looked to his 2 gunners and grinned. "Well, boys, we got 5 minutes to win this battle before Air Force takes all the credit." "Hoorah!" they responded, an ancient code long lost with the fall of countries. The soldiers of this battle tank were from the new generation. A century of children born and bred for battle, and for their entire generation, these children had only ever lost. They had been pushed out of their homes, forced into underground bunkers, and slaughtered by every alien mage they had encountered. The resistance called them the warrior generation. But within their generation, within whispered words exchanged only at mess halls, they donned themselves a new name, the Avenger generation. All M1s, the Mobile Tank Division's general said. The fire starters are keeping their elite forces in the back. If we leave them alone, there won't be an army for the Air Force to support. Hoorah! General Mahoney, Sam said. M1 Alpha to clear the way. Careful, son. We don't know what they're capable of. Sam's grin faded. He had seen hundreds of friends and comrades swallowed by Earth, torn apart by rocks and drowned by flood. He needn't reminding. With all due respect, sir, he said, they don't know what we're capable of. He maneuvered his tank into the forest. They're throwing rocks at us, First Gunner Porter laughed. The stones hit the titanium alloy of the tank and split apart to be crushed beneath the tank's tracks. Well then, Second Gunner Hallman said, I suppose we should return the favor. Sam nodded. Open fire, boys. Their M1 Abrams exploded in the Gatling crack of gunfire. The bullets eviscerated trees and aliens alike. Wood split into splinters as the forest slowly came down around them. Walls of dirt rumbled up from the earth. Sam took aim with the main cannon and pulled the trigger. The tank boomed and recoiled backwards. The earthen walls shattered like fine china. Their radio crackled. What's keeping you, M1 Sally? Those stone throwers proving too tough? It was Justin, the driver of another M1 which Sam had nicknamed M1 Lucy. They had been in the same class, both pulled away from infantry into the Mobile Armor Division. Sam wouldn't exactly call him a friend, but they were certainly closer than classmates. Each fought for their class's #1 spot, and in the end, Sam had won, but only barely. Please, Sam said, and exploded another dirt wall. Don't even bother moving forward. By the time you get there, those elite fire-taking assholes will be under my tracks. Well, you better hurry then, Sally. We're approaching with the rest of Beta Battalion right now. Happy hunting. Hoorah! Shit, Sam said. You hear that, boys? Full speed ahead. The fighting escalated as they advanced. Instead of rocks, these fire-takers wielded metal, steel-tipped spears that lodged itself into the tank's armor plating. These fire-takers were harder to shoot too. They were fast, zigzagging between trees, poking up their heads only long enough to launch an attack. Nobody in Sam's M1 was smiling now. They had to move just to stay alive. Even a slight stop would give a fire-taker the time to wind up his magic and launch the spear that would penetrate through their armor. On our right, Porter, Sam screamed. 9 o'clock, Hallman! But there was just too many. What the hell is the rest of the battalion doing? Sam screamed into the radio. Lucy, we're taking an awful lot of heat here, the radio hissed. Lucy? Beta Battalion? Requesting covering fire? Only the cackle of static replied. Shit, Sam muttered. Suddenly he heard a sharp crack, and a spear pierced through the armor of the tank. It shot out of the wall toward his head. There wasn't the time to react. All he could see its jagged tip approaching his face. It stopped inches from his nose. He stared, his mouth dry and hands shaking. Sam, Porter said, we gotta get out of the forest. Sam nodded, already turning the wheel. He aimed his tank toward a clearing between the trees and slammed the gas. The tank lurched forward and sped toward the overgrowth. Sam held his breath, his eyes fixated ahead. Spears flew all around him, colliding against the ground with explosive force. They approached the clearing and shot through it. Sam slammed the brakes, bringing his tank to a halt. Ahead of him was Beta Battalion, its remains at least. Pillars of earth shot through the tanks. Some were frozen in blocks of ice, and at the furthest point was M1 Lucy, impaled by 1,000 spears. The entire landscape, tanks included, was being consumed by the planet's gray fur. No, Sam muttered. The tank shuddered as something hit them. He looked back to see the fire-takers converging on his position. He hit the gas. M1. Sally lurched forward and stopped with the screech of metal. They had hit his tracks. Ahead of him, a group of 5 fire-takers slowly walked toward them. The elite were here. Porter and Hallman fired, twisting and turning the machine gun controls at every twitch of a leaf, at every shadow in the overgrowth, everything. But as long as they couldn't move, it didn't matter. Neither knew if they were finding their targets, only that the spears kept coming. They were both utterly average soldiers, middle-of-the-pack infantrymen that had come into the mobile division purely based on necessity. They knew it too. It's not that they were lazy or untalented, only that they had no aspirations for war. Neither were gung-ho like Sam and Justin, and when they left for battle, their only wish was to return in one piece. Porter didn't even know the origins of their war cry, hurrah. He didn't care to. It was something dumb Sam had introduced to their team. He had thought it was stupid, but pissing off the star-studded driver of your own tank was even stupider. So hurrah became his war cry too. "We have to dislodge our tracks," Porter shouted. Sam stood up. "I'm on it." "Like hell you are." He gritted his teeth. It was probably his brain telling him to shut up, but he refused it and said, "You're the only one who can drive this thing. Me and Hallman will go." "It's suicide to go out there without covering fire," Sam protested. "Hell, it's suicide even with covering fire." Porter jabbed a finger in his face. "Just keep revving the gas." And before Sam could say another word, before he could wizen up, he opened the hatch and climbed out into the brisk alien air. Hallman followed him out. "Finish the mission," he told Sam. The hatch closed behind them. Porter and Hallman grabbed the spear. Its icy metal sizzled on their skin, biting as it burned. He screamed into the air, his muscles trembling as spears crashed around him. Is this how it would end? He would die on the battlefield of a strange alien world as yet another nameless soldier without a grave? A spear impaled his leg, spiking pain throughout his body. A scream erupted from his throat. He turned to see that the fire-takers had left the cover of the forest and now advanced on their position. He exchanged eye contact with Hallman and forced a smile to his lips. In times like these, there was only one thing left to say. "Hurrah!" he screamed and pulled. M1 Sally's wheels twitched. The spear lodged in it, slowly inched out. "Hurrah!" Hallman screamed back and hugged the spear with his entire body, his flesh sizzling as he did. The spear dislodged and M1 Sally stumbled forward. "We did it!" Sam's voice came from the comms. "Get back in here, guys!" Porter chuckled and looked to his left. A spear stuck out of Hallman's chest as he stared back, unblinking and leaking blood. Porter dragged his own body around to face the fire-takers advancing toward him. He retrieved his pistol and took aim. He was no soldier, never meant to be. It was only bad luck that he had been born into the warrior generation. No, the Avenger generation. But as long as he was... A smile cut across his lips, and he took aim. Hoorah! The inside of the tank was eerily silent. All that sounded was the crunching of dirt beneath its tracks, and the clattering of a piece of metal still stuck between the wheels. The fire-takers' elite squad watched the tank approach, their lips curled up in a small smile. Sam had both hands gripped on the steering wheel, his foot pressed as far as it could go. He took aim and pulled the trigger. His cannon exploded and launched a fiery ball toward the mages. A wall of metal shot up from the ground and deflected the shell. The wall disintegrated to reveal the smug smiles still on their faces. Sam reached for another shell to prime, but only found the air. He glanced over and found a single shot left. It was a shell decorated by the men of M1 Sally. All mobile armor teams drew on the last one. If anyone reached it, chances were that they wouldn't survive, so they had to put everything into their one last shot. "Give 'em hell," Sam read. It was Porter's sloppy handwriting. Sam's eyes swelled with tears. Hurrah! He left the wheel and loaded the shell. When he had gotten back in the driver's seat, he saw that the elite mages hadn't moved. The bastards were toying with him just as they had toyed with Beta Battalion and M1 Lucy. Of course they would. Their world was based on the magic a person was born with. Everybody accepted the limitations of their birthright so normal foot soldiers could never threaten the elite. But that was their world. Sam had been born with nothing, just like his comrades and friends, and he would take from them everything. The ground beneath his tank rumbled and split. Sam fell against the side of the tank as the earth began swallowing it whole. He hit the far wall of the cockpit and coughed out a breath. The tank shook and squealed. Sam's stomach dropped. He knew what would come next. The Earth spat M1 Sally 50 feet into the air. The cockpit flipped, launching Sam against its walls. It threw him face first toward the spear protruding from its side. He jerked his head just in time. The blade sliced his cheeks open and was shoved deep into the cockpit, stabbing the other wall. Sam's cheek felt like someone had lit an ember in his mouth. Even the slightest movement made him dizzy with pain. A blackness encroached his vision. Then the cockpit flipped again. Commander Paxson hit the ground. The mobile armor team had done their job. They had cleared the forest of most of the fire-takers and even stalled the elite squad long enough for the Air Force to arrive. Drones flew through the layer of ice separating the human world from this one. Half their forces still hung in the sky, but they would reach the ground soon. Alpha Battalion, advance toward... A blast of wind hit Paxson like a physical punch to the gut. It took him inches off the floor before dropping him back down in the dirt. He scrambled up and found half his army suspended in the air. They weren't dropping. In fact, they were rising. Off in the distance, he could see a tornado forming, but nothing like the cyclones on Earth. This one spun with jagged ice and stone. It was the elite fire-takers. Only they could mix the elements in such a way. "Air support," he said. "You guys locked on?" They had to be. He prayed that they would be. "Negative. There's a damn tornado in our way." Paxson stared at his retreating drones. They stuttered in the air as they ran for safer currents. With one fell swoop, the fire-takers would end the humanity offensive. The tornado made its way toward his helpless army. "Give me the wind speed," the radio sounded. The words had been coughed out, ending in the gurgle of a drowned man. "Who is this?" Paxson asked. "The M1 Sally," the voice said. "Now give me the damn wind speed." A shot through the tornado would be impossible. Sam knew, which was why before he had been struck by the Earth, he had deliberately placed himself behind the fire-takers. If they were to turn their attention to his army, they would have their back to him. Those pieces of shit had underestimated him, just as he knew they would. M1 Sally lay on its side, its tracks broken and wheels crushed, but its main gun still intact. Sam grabbed his seat and pulled. If he had to guess, his ribcage had been shattered and his left arm snapped in two. Though he was no doctor, he could guess that his organs had been impaled by bone shards. His body screeched with every muscle twitch. He groaned and pulled. It felt like his sides would split open, but he pulled regardless, and at last made it to his seat. "M1 Alpha," Paxson's voice came. "I just confirmed with Air Force the targets are out of your effective range. Do not fire. I repeat, do not fire. Lay low and we will retrieve you when we have the chance." "No," Sam grunted. "Not Sally, not this shell. Give me the wind." "Lieutenant Mitchell, this is an order." "Then I'll guess." The radio hissed. Sam looked through the cracked screen of his console and adjusted his cannon. The radio beeped. "From behind them, it's a 10-mile-per-hour tailwind, 43 degrees to the north." "A tailwind, you say?" Sam wheezed out a painful chuckle. "It must be my lucky day. Even with the tailwind, you're trying to snipe a man with a tank. It's an impossible shot, and I can't afford to waste good soldiers. Just stay put, and a retrieval team will—" Sam muted his radio. If only Paxson knew that his computer had been fried too. So no auto-correction to his aim, no automatic adjustments to wind. This would all be manual. He smiled. All those years of competition with Justin, surpassing the rest of his mobile armor class by miles, training when everyone else had long since fallen asleep. He finally understood what it was all for. "Hoorah!" He pulled the trigger. "Direct hit confirmed," an Air Force scout said over the radio. Paxson stared in the direction of the M1 Alpha. The M1 Sally, deep in enemy territory, had just sounded a dinner bell screaming, "I am here." The tornado disintegrated, flinging icy blades down upon the fire-taker's main force. His soldiers floated into the trees, and the drone began bombing the enemy army. "The crazy bastard actually took the shot," the Air Force scout said, chuckling. Paxson dug his nails into his palms. He brought up his radio. "To all soldiers, M1 Sally has just cleared the way forward. Their armies are scattered. Expect limited resistance through the first stage of the humanity offensive." He lowered the radio in thought. The M1 Sally deserved more accolades than his words could give, but all he had were words. He brought the receiver back to his lips, a single word on his mind. He had no idea what it meant, but it was the last words of M1 Sally. It felt right.
Hoorah!